Welcome to the 74 Weld YouTube channel. My name's Quinn. My goal here on all these videos is very simple. It's to answer the question of why. And in answering that question, we will inherently provide you with education, detailed insight into why we do what we do, and put this stuff into context that you care about for your own application in off-road. All right, today I am joined with none other than Sonny McIntyre. Sonny's been a friend of mine for, I don't know, probably 15 years.
Oh yeah.
We're gonna be talking about shocks. This is not gonna be an all-encompassing shock video. What we are gonna do, we're gonna touch base on how to properly set up a shock. This is gonna be primarily focused on Toyota Tacomas. We'll talk about the woes that I see with existing shock packages. We will discuss long travel. We'll discuss a portal in that application. And we'll also give you a little bit of info about how to properly set up a shock for Tacoma, 4Runner, FJ Cruiser, and all that stuff. So I'm gonna throw the question. Sonny and I have kind of discussed this a bit. We'll start with race shocks, and the reason I would want to start with that is race cars are typically blank slates, right?
Correct.
So
correct.
If you're going to set up a shock on a race car, how do you do that?
You're going to have a package of, let's say for an example on the rear, you're going to have a package of a 16-inch coilover, 18-inch bypass. So when you're setting up your mounts, your upper mounts, you're basing it on the travel of that given shock. So let's say for an example, you're gonna run a 40 by 18 bypass. You know that you wanna have a specific amount of up travel, so you would build your upper mounts predicated somewhat on that. Yep. So if you have an 18-inch bypass, you know that you want 11 inches, 10, 11, most likely 11 inches of shock shaft showing at ride height. And that is going to be the basis for what you're going to be doing. The coilover, when you short stroke a coilover, it's not going to be that detrimental as it is with a bypass.
What do you mean by short stroking? Define that for us.
So when you take short stroking is, let's say for an example, you have a 2.5 by 16.
Yeah.
You're going to short stroke it to 15 inches because of the strap. So a strap's going to suck it up an inch.
Yep.
So then you're short stroking that, but because of what it does, it doesn't matter that it's short stroked.
You're essentially not using all the travel that
Correct.
that shock has.
Correct.
But on a standard coilover that's not an internal bypass, that's not really going to kill you.
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct. It'll affect your spring rate somewhat, a minimal amount, but it will affect it a little bit.
Okay, so if you're setting up a race car, you care about upper mounts, you primarily care about how much shock shaft you have showing at ride height, right?
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct.
And what that translates to, essentially, and this is where our conversation will go, is shock shaft at ride height is essentially where does that piston live in the body of the shock?
Correct. So as an example on this Fox, you have overlapping compression tubes.
Yep.
And then you have a bump zone up here.
Where there's no tube.
Where there's no tube, so the compression force, when that shock goes through its stroke, the force that's here is a bump zone.
Yeah.
So it jumps astronomically in this.
Is that because of your ability to run heavier valving with bypass tubes? Or, I mean, because if you have a very light valve stack in that piston, is it still going to hydraulic at the top?
Yes, it just will not be as extreme.
Okay.
And that's the thing about valving, which we have this discussion all the time, and I won't do a deep dive into it.
That's a different day.
Yeah, it will be a different day. Valving is infinite, and valving is predicated on what the customer wants. Because you can spread out Tacoma long travel, sand car, trophy truck, 6100 truck, 12 car, 10 car, and so on. Everything is different, and everybody wants it to do something different at a moment in time.
Well, and everybody, here's I would think one of the difficult challenges for you is everybody's definition of good is different also.
Correct, which is the first thing out of my mouth is going to be right as a perception.
Yeah, So I personally like a suspension slightly firmer so that I know that when I mash into something, it'll be there, as opposed to it floating like a Cadillac.
Correct.
I don't like that feeling.
See, whereas I drive a 2017 4Runner with a long travel kit.
Yeah.
No sway bars, coilover bypass front, bypass rear. That thing's a marshmallow on and a couch everywhere it goes.
Right.
But I can smack into a parking stop at 30 miles an hour and it doesn't upset the vehicle.
Yeah.
But if I go mashing through the whoops, it's going to blow through the travel too quickly.
Right. Well, which when we first started tuning, you tuned an Ultra 4 car that I had in 2011.
Yep.
And I remember, you know, you telling me, look, we're going to tune at the speed that you want to drive at.
Correct.
Not as fast as possible.
Right.
Don't try to reach
Right.
90 miles an hour. If
Right.
you want to drive at 60, we'll tune at 60.
Right.
And so shock tuning, you get a kind of a window that you get to tune in,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
And so if you take a car that's meant to go 90 miles an hour and you drive it around at 60 miles an hour, it's going to ride really different.
Very much so. Very much so. You're going to have a harshness because you're setting up the shocks based on a shock shaft speed.
Yeah.
When you're doing 60 miles an hour through a whatever whoop section it may be, the shock shaft speed is slower. When you're doing 90 miles an hour through that same section in the same vehicle, you have to have more valving set up and the truck needs to react differently because of the shaft speed picks up.
So when that shaft speed picks up, it wants to bend those shims more, and you'll actually add either thicker shims or more to it to slow that shaft speed down, making that a firmer shock, so when you drive it at low speeds, it's going to be more harsh.
Correct, which is what we strive for, is to what we call to have, and DJ's super good about it, to have shocks be small bump compliant, but still work on a medium to big bump. Because we constantly are asking people, especially in 6100 truck, when we're tuning, does it hurt in your butt or does it hurt in your back? Where does it hurt? And they say it does this, this, and this. Perfect. Because then we can make whatever adjustments we need to make as far as the tube, or if the shock's gonna come off, then we'll just make a valving change there on the spot and off we go.
Okay, so I guess before we go down a different rabbit hole, which I'd love to do some other time, we'll dive into Tacoma suspension. The outline I have here, wheel travel. Why is this important, but not nearly as important as people think? Usable travel off-road and driving around town. Let's talk about that.
Okay. Here's the thing about, we're gonna stick with Tacoma.
Yeah.
So an average Tacoma with a Fox 2.5 coilover extended travel has about 4.9 inches of shock shaft movement.
Now that's the physical length of the shock shaft. That's not how much travel you get.
Correct.
That's shock shaft.
Shock shaft movement and wheel travel are two different things because that one is predicated on wheel to motion ratio.
Okay, so explain motion ratio very briefly.
So if you have 1 inch of shock shaft movement and your motion to wheel ratio is 1.75, that means at the wheel, it's gonna stroke that to its 1 inch of shaft.
Okay, so 1 inch is...
Wheel travel and shock shaft travel
Yep.
are two different things because of where the pickup point is based on where it is in the lower arm and the pivots to the wheel.
So I always think of it as the easiest way to understand that concept is if you have an A-arm and halfway up that A-arm at 50%, you have a shock, then 2 inches of travel at the wheel equates to 1 inch of travel at the shock. That's a 2-to-1 ratio.
Correct.
I won't dive into, I'll let you dive into motion ratio implications. So talk about the Tacoma motion ratio and what's good about it, what's bad about it, if anything is good about it.
Honestly, there isn't very much good about it, to be honest with you, because especially within the aftermarket industry, when you're building shocks, there is only so much travel that you're going to get out of the wheel, and there's only so much shock shaft movement you're going to get out of it because of the vehicle, how the vehicle is set up from the manufacturer.
Yeah.
And so then you're going to start jumping into, which we'll dive into in a moment, is you're going to get into long travel. But for the average person that's going to bolt in a aftermarket coilover shock and set their ride height at, you know, they want 2 to 2.5 inches of lift. And that's the misconception, which I would like to state.
Yeah.
Coilovers were not designed so much for ride height. They were designed for performance. So when we get the call of, hey man, I want this 0 to 3 inch coilover for the front of my 05 and up Tacoma. Yeah, you're gonna get 3 inches out of it, but it's not gonna ride good because you only have, for sake of argument, 4.9 inches of shock shaft.
Yeah.
Well, if you crank down on the coilover to get the ride height up, to get your close to 3 inches, and now you've got 4 inches of shock shaft showing at ride height, and you've only got 0.9 left for droop travel, and it rides like crap. So when you go over a speed bump in the parking lot, yeah, it tops out, and then you feel that clunk when it tops out, and then you go, hey, it's doing this. Right. Take some of the preload out of it, and it'll drive 10 times better than it does.
Okay, so typical travel, I mean, that extended travel coilover is, you get about 9 inches of wheel travel out of that? Is that right?
Yeah, if you were to calculate it, it's probably, yeah, it's probably pretty close to 9 actually. It's probably pretty close.
So that's with the factory suspension. What about, so if with a stock Tacoma Fox extended travel 2.5 shock, you're gonna pull about 9 inches of the wheel. What do you get out of a long travel kit?
You're probably gonna get close to 12, probably 12 to 13 inches maybe.
Okay, and they run what travel shock?
Normally it's a 2.5 by 8 coilover, depending on whose kit it is.
Yeah.
But they also get sucked up a bit. So what I mean by sucked up a bit is there's usually an internal droop spacer in there to ever keep the shock from going beyond a certain point.
And why do they put that internal spacer in there?
There's a couple of reasons, but one of the reasons is what we used to do back in the day is if you put an internal droop spacer in there, if something ever fails, limbing strap, for an example, fails, the shock will become the strap to get you to wherever you need to be.
Okay.
So internal droop spacers also have an effect on where, you know, you're shortening the shock, so to say, so the extended length's not the same. So you're not worried about binding up steering. You're not worried about binding up a CV.
Yep.
You know that it'll never go beyond that point.
Okay. So what do you typically see? This kind of, I guess I'll transition into the conversation that we started with, which is piston placement or shock shaft showing at ride height. In a perfect world with that, say, Fox extended travel shock, let's start there.
Yep.
What kind of shock shaft would you want to see at ride height to give an overall good quality compliant ride?
You see, and that's the thing. And that's the thing, ride is going to be a perception because the dude that has to have a high ride height because he wants to stuff X amount of tire in there.
Well, forget that. In a perfect world.
You would probably want about 3.5 inches of shaft showing.
Okay.
If you had a 4.9 inch stroke to deal with.
So you want a little bit more up travel than droop.
Yep. Yep.
But, okay, so then what do you typically see with long travel kits on a Tacoma with, say, a 35? Because I would think that's probably the most common setup.
Yeah, so if you ran a 2.5 by 8 coilover as an example, you're probably going to have about 4.5 inches of shaft showing, 5 inches of shaft showing at ride height.
Okay. And does that have a droop spacer in it?
Some of them do, depending on the kit. Yep.
Okay. So, I mean, I guess tell us a little bit about your Tacoma. It's currently, sorry, your 4Runner.
Yep.
It's on long travel. How did you set that up to get 35s and a good ride on it?
I chose to push the envelope and make my mistakes, so I blew through CVs. So what I did was I did not run an internal droop spacer. I relied solely on the limit strap. Drove it around, used it to beat the crap out of it, and went hunting with my son and did whatever. Blew out the outboard CV instantly. So I wanted to see how it would, what happens. So then I had to redesign how the limit strap upper mount is to suck it up, to keep it ever from going beyond that point, so I'm not repping CV boots.
Okay.
And I don't like to rely on an internal droop spacer as a limit strap. It's a safety precaution in a race truck for a lot of people to do, and
it's a backup, but a limit strap is part of the suspension, and you should be running it.
It is when you do long travel.
Yeah.
Even on UTVs, limit straps are your friend. They're always going to be.
Yep. Okay. So now is yours, are you 60% up travel, 40% down? Where would you say?
Ooh, I'm probably 65% up travel.
So then your 4Runner probably sits fairly low.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, so I only run a 34 on a 17.9.
Okay, and you have minimal lift to get that.
Correct.
So this will transition into a point that I wanted to talk about, which is shock preload and spring rates. Let's talk a little bit about what I see all over is guys thinking that if they want to lift their truck with a coilover, they just crank that top cap preload. Yes. What does that do?
Yes, they do.
I mean, it does. It lifts the vehicle, sure.
Yes, it does.
What I always say on this, and I joke around about it, is you can drive a vehicle with your feet. It doesn't make it a good idea. You can do it. You can definitely do it.
Like the Flintstones, but yes.
Yeah, I mean, it's... So tell us, let's talk briefly about negative effects of adding preload to gain ride height.
Yeah, so I touched on this the other day on Instagram and had a...
Which is why I reached out to you. I said, dude, we got to make a video.
Yeah, that's how it started, and a gentleman responded back about something, and then I had to have a rebuttal because I couldn't leave well enough alone. So,
and now we have a long form content where you can actually say what the fuck is on your mind.
Right. So the thing about that, adding preload, so we're going to keep in Tacoma, extended travel front Fox.
Okay.
Strokes 4.9 inches. So when you're out there cranking on that coil nut to get the ride height up, because you're adding preload to the spring, the negative effects, you're going to top out the shock, which means no droop travel.
Yep.
And you're going to hear that clunking. You also have to keep in mind that you are adding spring force, which means that tire is constantly going to want to drop out as fast as it can because you're adding spring force.
So those are compounding negative effects because now you have less droop travel and you have more spring force trying to get that shock to droop travel as fast as possible.
Correct.
So you're going to go to bump.
Correct.
Or sorry, you're going to go to full droop. It's going to pin a lot quicker.
Very much so. And then people come to us and go, hey, I need my shocks revalved. No, not necessarily.
Well,
what you need to not have is 2.5 inches of thread showing.
Yeah.
And then you wonder why it doesn't ride correctly.
Yeah.
So if you have and I won't dive into it too much, but for an example, if you have a 3-inch ID, 14-inch length, 600-pound spring, and let's say for sake of argument, that thing coil binds at 7 inches, but you've already got 3 inches of preload in it. So it's only going to travel 4 inches.
Yeah.
Yeah. No amount of valving is going to fix that. It doesn't matter.
And so I'll stay on this topic, but this then segments into, like, I make the argument, and not in every case, but I make the argument that a stock suspension like my Tacoma with an extended travel Fox shock like I run on mine is going to outperform and ride better with a portal on the end. In 90% of the case, it's going to be better than a long travel suspension. It's not going to be more travel. And I thought about this the other day too, because I've made a bunch of statements online that we don't change your wheel travel. That's actually not correct. By adding a portal, you are increasing wheel travel, because the way travel is determined is it's on an arc. And so you have an arc length, arm to wheel mount surface. And because our portal widens that surface, we get an extra, I think it was 1/2 of an inch to 3/4 of an inch of the wheel. I still say a portal is not for a long travel suspension, but what it does allow you to do is not over crank and just let the coil over. Like, I think I run 1/2 an inch of preload.
Right, which, perfect. Our rule of thumb is 1 inch, max 2 inches, and I don't even like the 2 inches. No pun intended. But you don't ever want to go beyond a certain amount of preload. If you're going beyond a certain amount of preload, that means that the spring rate is incorrect, or something is not correct. And I guess diving into a little bit about what Quinn's saying about his portals, the thing about the portal is the best of both worlds, because you're going to get the ride height up, which is what everybody wants, and you can run whatever size tire you want. The advantage of the portal is the gears in the portal. You're not jumping into changing a ring and pinion now because you're running a 35 or a 37 on a Tacoma. The gear reduction at the portal just took care of all of that. Plus, you get the ride height, you run whatever tire you want, and then if you decide to throw in a Fox extended travel with an upper control arm and so on, you can keep the ride height down, because what you're looking at is the angle of the lower arm at the vehicle's ride height. When they're like this, you know it's pinned and it's going to ride like crap. You already know that. So you're going to take some of the preload out of it, get the arms to sit. They won't ever necessarily be flat, but they'll be damn near.
Yeah.
And you know that you have an amount of up travel that you need.
So it's a combination of usable up travel, usable droop. Now, I will not make the statement that the portal's the only way to go, long travel has no place. If you're mobbing in the desert, like, a long travel kit's not bad. I mean, I've had this conversation a bunch with Dustin from Dirt King Fabrication. Dustin's been a friend of mine for as long as I've known you.
Yeah, long time.
Right down the street from you, super good kids. They make great kits. And that's what you run on yours, right?
I run a Dirt King kit on my 4Runner.
We've had multiple customers who've bought portals from us with Dirt King kits. Yeah, their stuff's solid. So Dustin and I actually had a conversation about this yesterday. I'm not saying that there is no place for a long travel kit. I do think that most people that buy a long travel kit are not actually using the amount of travel that they have.
Correct. I would agree with that statement. I would agree with that statement to an extent. What I mean by that is most people are running, I would say a majority of the people are running a long travel because they're trying to fit X amount size tire.
Yeah.
So that's why they're doing it. But then when you get into long travel, you're talking fiberglass. There's other components that are going to be involved in what you're doing.
I should have put a caveat on that. So long travel in and of itself is a positive. It's good, because as you extend those arms, you're changing the radius of the arc that the suspension is traveling on. You want that radius to be as large as possible.
Correct.
Where people go wrong, and this is something that I've said for a little while, and I will always continue to say this, I don't believe that anybody ever wants a lift kit on any vehicle. I don't care what platform it is. You don't want a lift kit. You don't want one on a Jeep, on a Bronco, on a Tacoma, and on any other platform that we will build for, just across the board. You don't want a lift kit. What you want is to run a larger tire.
Correct.
So we've just been trained in the off-road community that 1 + 1 = 2. Okay, that's true. You can do a body lift. You can do...
Yes, you can.
Again, you can drive with your feet. It doesn't make it a good idea.
Yes, you can.
There are other ways to accommodate a large tire. And where I'm going with this is we need to get out of the mindset of the only way to run a large tire is X.
Correct. And I'm
Go for a lift kit.
Correct, and I'm just going to interrupt you for a second.
Yeah.
Here's the thing about that, because going back into the industry, I've been in the industry since 1989. I've been in the aftermarket automotive, since '89. You know, when you had lift kit companies such as Fabtech and Superlift and Skyjacker and so on and so on and so on, everybody wanted, 6-inch kit and 35s and blah, blah, blah. My thing about it is, which one of the gentlemen that, when I was hired in the industry in '89, opened my eyes quite a bit to, what direction to go as far as the industry and where it needed to go. So he was adamant about one thing all the time, and that was, it's our job to educate the customer to make a decision as to what will work best for them. Mm-hmm. Because I'm guilty of it all the time, and DJ gets super pissed at me, but talking people out of buying $10,000 shock packages because all they really want is, a Bilstein 6112, and they want to run 33s because they're going to go down the trail with their rooftop tent and go hang out. Right. It's our job to educate you, which is what we're trying to do.
Yeah. Well, I don't want to get off topic on this, but I have to. We're going to make a mental note of it. I'm going to continue down this road.
Okay.
We need to talk about shock size versus and we're going to jump back into this. Is bigger always better? Yeah. Fuck, here we go.
Yeah, rabbit hole.
Jumping back to this topic of what do we really want? What everybody's trying to do is run a slightly larger tire. And what I'm trying to do, which admittedly, this is an uphill battle for us, I'm trying to change the narrative around the way you look at how to get to that tire. That's what a portal is. It's just another way to lift a vehicle and put a bigger tire on. And the way we're going to do it is not to mess with the suspension much. And, I get that people go, oh, well, you're not gaining any wheel travel. You're right. You're right. Well, you're not right. We gain half an inch of wheel travel.
Half an inch to 3/4 of an inch.
I don't care. I'll tell you that, so I had my Bronco out last weekend. I just put Fox 3.0 internal bypasses on it because I'm working on a custom shock package with Fox for the Bronco. That thing was cushy and floaty and soft at 60 miles an hour down these washes, and I got to hit a couple square edges.
Yep.
And granted, they're only, it's curb height square edges.
Yeah, it's 4
And I'm
inches.
in a wash in Anza Borrego with my kids in the car, so I'm not trying to get crazy. But I'll contend that, dude, 95% of the people that are out there are recreational weekend guys. They've got their kids in the vehicle.
Yep.
You're not trying to run 3-foot deep whoops at 60, 70, 80 miles an hour. You want that thing to be cush and compliant and smooth.
Right.
And you can do that without long travel.
Yes.
Now, is a long travel going to outperform our product in desert whoops? Yeah, if it's set up right and you tune it, sure.
Yes.
More is better.
Yes.
And you're going to do a long travel suspension. I don't have a ton of experience with all the kits out on the market. Because I'm friends with Dustin and Nick from Dirt King, I just kind of fall back onto their stuff because I know that they do their homework on it too. They have come a long ways.
Oh, a long ways.
A long ways in the time
ways.
period that we've been standing on the sidelines.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, so I didn't even have it on our list of stuff to talk about, but let's talk about shock diameter because I think that that's super important, right?
Yes.
Is bigger better?
In some applications, yes. So what we run into, and DJ and I go back and forth on this all the time, and it's hard to educate people about it, and I won't do a deep dive into it, but every application will be specific. So what I mean by that is and I'm going to use old school terminology. So long travel sand car. That car weighs 3,500 pounds. It doesn't need an astronomically giant shock package.
Yeah.
Then you're going to start looking at a 6100 truck. You're running a 2.5 coilover and a 3.5, 4.0, 4.5 bypass. You also have to keep in mind that shock shaft diameter is going to play a role because
that comes into valving.
Valving and fluid displacement.
Touch on fluid displacement.
So as an example, if you have a 3-inch diameter shock with a 1-inch shaft, you can tune that, what we call small bump compliant. You can tune it to be small bump compliant. It is going to be easier to tune a shock that's 3 inches in diameter with a 7/8 shaft because it is not displacing the amount of fluid that the same 1-inch shaft would be. I shouldn't say same, but it's going to react differently, and the 7/8 shaft in a 3-inch shock is going to be more small bump compliant because of the fluid displacement.
Yeah, you're trying to essentially, you have a piston in here and you're trying to push fluid to either side, right?
Correct.
So that's why, like, if you have, like, I have a Dodge Ram 3500.
Yep.
The thought of putting, and say I come to you and go, I want the best shock possible. Give me that 4-inch bypass. Why is that thing going to ride harsh as hell?
Because of you're displacing too much fluid.
So, because you're not gonna, so.
You're not ever gonna see, number one, you're not ever gonna see the shaft speeds.
Shaft speed, and so shaft speed directly translates to ride feel, because without fast shaft speed, you physically have so much volume of fluid in that shock that you're not going to be able to displace it, so it's gonna feel really stiff.
Rigid.
Yeah.
Very rigid.
So I remember, a kind of side note, when we first started tuning my car in 2011, I had a 2-inch coilover and a 2.5-inch bypass.
Yep.
And we were doing everything we could to dump as much rebound as possible on that front end.
Yep.
And I could never get the car to be where we thought it could be, right?
Right.
And so you came up with the idea to take a 2.5-inch shock and put, these are 3/4 tubes, put 1-inch bypass tubes on it.
Yeah.
So that we could allow that fluid to move past the piston, and you could get more volume of fluid to move, because I physically just didn't have the sprung weight to be able to get that shock to work.
Correct. And one of the things about that, real quick, about tubes, bypass tubes, diameter of a bypass tube, think of your finger over a garden hose. And putting your finger over the garden hose and how much water you can let out with your finger in the garden hose.
Yeah.
It's the same thing. A larger tube is going to increase
the volume of flow.
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct.
So then you said, hey dude, we need to make this same shock with a 2.5-inch bypass shock with 1-inch bypass tubes on it.
Yep.
And we approached one shock manufacturer and they said, no, that's dumb, it's never gonna work. And we said, no, we're not asking for your thoughts on this, we want you to build this.
Right.
And they came back with an astronomical price.
Yep, I remember
And then
that.
at the time, Wayne Israelson was at Fox.
Yep.
And Wayne goes, I'll build that for you.
Right.
And Wayne built it and it worked.
Right.
And lo and behold, like maybe 2 months later was King of the Hammers, and they had that same shock that you designed.
Weird
on a bunch of race cars out there, and they had the brand new idea.
Right. Right. That's funny.
Part of the reason why I'm partial to Fox.
I remember that. I remember that.
That was
an ongoing battle.
Yeah.
That was an
And so I took all the
battle.
shocks off my car, and I went to Fox, and I've been on Fox ever since.
Yeah, we're
what
good.
did we not touch on? So we talked a bit about how cranking for ride height is a bad idea. I don't think I really touched too much on travel ratios, and one of the things, and I've said this online, but when you look at a long travel kit, you have to look at it in its entirety. So if you have a long travel like yours, where you're 60% up, 40% down, that's pretty good. Like that, that thing's going to ride good.
Right.
If you have a long travel kit and you are 80% up, 20% down, hang on, dude.
Hang on, dude, because it's on the strap.
Yeah, so it's probably going to ride like crap. So it's not about how much shock shaft you have. It's about how you use it.
Right.
And these are the nuances that the point of making these kind of videos is to flush out this kind of stuff and have the long form conversation of more is not better. More can be better if it's done right, and here's how you do it right.
Correct.
There's nuances to this stuff. It's not just throw a big long travel shock on there and it's gonna ride amazing.
Right.
It could ride great, it could ride like dog shit.
Right.
It depends on how it's set up, and that's why guys like this stay busy.
Yeah, and that's the one thing I'm gonna plug about us real quick, because DJ and I go back and forth about this.
Who's DJ?
DJ is the service manager at Down South.
Okay.
I've known him for a while now, and super good dude. I keep calling him a kid, but he's a grown-ass man now,
Yeah.
but it's force of habit, and I'm old.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, it's your toy. You just tell me what you want it to do at whatever speed you're comfortable. Because one of the things we used to get real quick back in the day was people would come to us and go, hey man, I want the Jason Voss valving setup for my truck. Yeah, but you don't drive at 110. You drive at 80. The truck's not gonna like it. Or we'll get the guy that goes, yeah man, I was in Glamis and I have a long travel sand car and he was ripping down Sand Highway and blah, blah, blah. But I want it to be set up for 40 to 50 miles an hour, not 90 miles an hour. Right.
It's critical. Be honest.
Everything has its place.
Yeah.
We want it to be comfortable for you, not what we want or somebody else
Yeah.
wants or so on and so on. But
Well, and there's even more nuance in that, in the sense that you can have two different cars that do really well at 65 miles an hour,
yes.
and they feel really different. And that's where, like, when we talked earlier, you like a Cadillac, a fluffy,
marshmallowy, floaty catch, you know, it's just, I don't want it to catch
and
nothing.
I
and
like
it just,
a little bit of that, but I guarantee I like my stuff set up firmer. That's why, like, on my old cars, I would always run a lot of rear sway bar.
Right.
Because I never liked that wishy-washy feeling.
Right.
I'd run a lot of rear sway bars so I could break the ass end of the car loose and slide sideways into a turn.
Right.
Whereas some people are fine with that body roll.
Right.
I didn't like that.
Right.
So much of it comes down to feel, and that's why guys like you, if you get access to Mike Kim and you're on Fox, that's why there's really only, you're in a group of 3 or 4 guys or a half dozen guys in the world that do what you do.
Yeah.
Which is, there's lots of guys that work on shocks. There's not that many people that really know how to tune cars and have done it for as long as guys like you, Wayne Israelson,
Todd.
SDG. Todd at SDG's
Keith.
been.
I mean, there's a bunch of people.
Yeah, that's true.
There's
well,
quite a
when
few
you say
people.
a bunch, I mean, what is there, 10
bunch,
guys in the world?
and yes, there's probably 6 to 10 guys.
Yeah.
And that's the thing is we all, the basis will always be the same.
Yeah.
You're going to get from A to B, you're just going to go a different route.
Yeah. But the goal is, this is not something that you just grab off the shelf.
No.
You can.
You can, but it might not ride good.
It's not going to ride that great. So I'll kind of finish this as to saying, like, tune your shocks, man. Tune them and then rebuild them, right?
Yeah, that's the other thing we joke about. You know, service your shit. Because, you know, we had a guy, I just did some Raptor Gen 1s. So I did some Raptor Gen 1s, you know, about a week or so ago, and the guy goes, I got 100,000 miles on them. Yes, you did. Yes, you did.
When you open it up, you can tell.
Yes, you can. I don't recommend that. You need to service them about every 30 to 40,000 miles.
Yeah.
And that's, you know.
And that's a perfect time to have the conversation of, hey man, I'd kind of like this thing to be a little bit softer, and what can I do to get there?
Correct, and you can make a valving change while the shock's open.
Right, because if you're gonna service your shock, you're opening the whole thing up, you're dumping all the fluid out.
Yep.
Your valve stack is sitting right there on the piston.
Yep.
It's half 20 in most circumstances.
Yep.
Take that nut off, throw it away, put a new one on.
Yep.
Change the valving if you want. Do it. I would highly suggest valving shocks because you'll see a night and day difference. And you might not go the right direction the first time.
Correct. And one thing, and I just want to plug in here at the end, because our industry is starting to go in this direction and it kind of scares me. When people come to us and go, hey, I want the trail rig valving, or I want this valving because so-and-so has this valving. To simplify it, I understand that has its place. The issue becomes valving is infinite and ride is a perception.
Yeah.
You just need to tell us what you want it to do, or how you want it to drive at, whatever speed or whatever the application may be.
It's starting the conversation as
Correct.
to, hey man, when I
Correct.
smash in, and you got to be honest in this stuff. When I smash into a speed bump,
Right.
I want it to feel like this. Okay.
Right.
And then Sonny would know how to translate that into valving.
Correct.
Yeah.
And that's what we do all the time, and that's what you do.
Cool. I think we nailed some of that stuff.
We did good.
Yeah.
We did good.
I enjoyed it. I actually liked making this video. I've been wanting to do some of this stuff for a while, and I appreciate you taking your time out of your
Oh, no
day.
worries. Glad to be here.
Sonny at Down South Motorsports.
What's up, buddy?
Sorry, I was
That's
pointing
me.
at the sun's out, guns out.
That's it. Sleeves. No sleeves, buddy.
Yeah, check them out. Are you on YouTube yet?
Oh, I haven't touched that in years, dude. Haven't touched that in years.
It's
I'll
good
get on
stuff.
YouTube eventually.
All right. Well, you can always reach him. He's in San Diego.
Yep, San Diego, call the shop,
Yeah,
and then our Instagram or whatever it is. And
that's true. You're on there.
yeah, I'm
Yeah.
on there trying to keep everybody from adding too much preload to their, oh yeah. Don't add so much preload to your stock shock. But if you got any questions, give us a holler.
Yep. And until the next one, thanks for watching, and we'll see you
ya.
again soon. Thanks for watching. If you enjoy this type of content, subscribe to our channel. It helps us grow and provide you guys with more informative, good content, and we'll see you on the next one.